Welcome to Secret Affairs. Today, I'm sharing a story that didn't explode into my life with drama or disaster. It didn't arrive with warning signs or loud moments. Started quietly, so quietly that I almost missed it. The kind of moment that slips into an ordinary day and settles itself into a corner of your mind without permission. I didn't recognize it at first. Most people don't. But looking back now, I understand exactly when the shift began. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon in Springfield, Illinois. My name is Claire Matthews, and when this story took place, I was 33 years old, married for almost a decade, and living in a quiet neighborhood where nothing unpredictable ever really happened. Springfield is a steady place. Days pass softly. Routines repeat. People live lives that make sense. And I love the comfort of knowing what tomorrow would look like before I even woke up. That afternoon, the house smelled like lemon and rosemary. I had invited my old college friend Megan for dinner, and I was determined to make everything perfect. I hadn't seen her in months, and reconnecting felt important. The oven hummed, the windows let in warm sunlight. Everything felt calm. Daniel, my husband, had mentioned earlier that week that his coworker I'd stop by to borrow a tool from the garage. I barely knew him, only met him twice. He always seemed polite, reserved, the kind of man who kept to himself. Nothing about him ever stuck in my mind. But that day, he did. I was in the pantry grabbing a bread basket when I heard a sharp creak behind me. I turned. There he was, standing closer than I expected, a screwdriver in his hand and surprise in his eyes. The moment lasted only a second. Nobody said anything inappropriate. Nothing happened. But something in that moment made the air feel different, as if a tiny shift had occurred in a room I thought I knew. He apologized for startling me, and I laughed it off. We exchanged a few words, small talk, polite, innocent. But the brief conversation stayed with me. I didn't understand why. It was nothing, absolutely nothing. Yet it echoed in my mind longer than it should have. Not because of him, not because of the moment, but because it made me suddenly aware that I was moving through life on autopilot. Later that night, while Megan and I laughed over dinner, part of me kept drifting back to that pantry moment. I didn't want to. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't temptation. It was more like a mental tap on the shoulder, reminding me that I hadn't been paying attention to my own life. The next morning, nothing looked different. Daniel hummed while making coffee. He always did that. The sun lit up the kitchen the same way it always had. But inside, I felt a tiny shift, like someone had nudged the lens through which I viewed my world. Suddenly, small moments stood out more than usual. At the grocery store, when an older man held the door open for me, I noticed the warmth in his eyes. At the library, where I worked, I helped a tired older gentleman search for a forgotten book his wife once loved. When I finally found it buried in a dusty archive box, the softness in his voice when he thanked me felt unusually touching. These weren't romantic moments. They were human moments. Moments I had been walking past for years. That's when I realized something inside me had woken up. A week later, Springfield was hit with a storm on my drive home from work. Rain blurred the entire world. Daniel waited at the door with 2 umbrellas, worried I'd run through the storm alone. His face looked softer than usual in the dim porch light. Inside, I watched the rain with him in silence, and for the first time in a while, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude, just for the fact that he was there. But awareness is a strange thing. Once something wakes it up, it doesn't go back to sleep easily. 2 weeks later, completely out of the blue, Daniel suggested we invite Ethan and his wife Lily over for a game night. A part of me wondered how that would feel. Not out of fear, but out of curiosity. Would the pantry moments still feel strange? When they arrived, the evening unfolded effortlessly. Lily was warm and funny, full of bright energy. Ethan, quiet as always, blended into the conversation with ease. Nothing felt awkward. Nothing felt tense. It made me realize just how small that pantry moment really was, how it had only felt big. Because it happened in a quiet part of my life where nothing ever changed. But even though the moment itself faded, the awareness it awakened didn't. Suddenly, I noticed how Daniel always left the last cookie for me, how he drummed his fingers when he was excited, how he tilted his head slightly before laughing. I noticed my neighbors more, the barista drawing a leaf in my latte foam, the sound of children laughing outside. Life felt fuller not because of Ethan, but because that tiny pantry tap had reminded me to pay attention. And then something unexpected happened. One Saturday morning, Daniel and I were cleaning the garage when he casually said, "Oh, by the way, Ethan told me he thinks he scared you the other day when he walked in." I paused for a moment before laughing. So he had noticed too. Daniel joked about how quietly Ethan walked, how everyone said he seemed to appear out of nowhere. That's when Daniel said, "You're so predictable, Claire. I mean that in a good way. You like things steady. But sometimes life taps you on the shoulder just to make sure you're awake." Those words stuck with me. They explained everything I'd been feeling. The pantry moment didn't change my marriage, didn't create any desire. It didn't spark anything inappropriate. But it did wake me up. It did make me see the world differently. It reminded me that life is happening in front of me, not beside me. Weeks later, I found myself standing outside at sunrise. The sky was warm with soft gold light. Birds were singing. The world felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. And I realized that sometimes it isn't the big events that shift a life. Sometimes it's the smallest ones. A creak behind you, a laugh you didn't expect, a moment that stops you just long enough to see your world again. That pantry moment didn't matter because of who was in it. It mattered because it reminded me that I was still here, still human, still capable of noticing beauty, connection, and meaning in the smallest corners of the day. Life didn't change in a dramatic way, but I did, just a little, and sometimes that's enough. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss more powerful real-life stories like this.